just put your, you can put your hand up in the hand up icon, but it's actually easier for me if you type in hands up. It's easier to monitor who sort of got their hands up first. If you don't mind typing in hands up on the chat, then I can manage that a little bit better. And yeah, and then we'll go through the questions. I know there's a presentation for us. So let me get through the prayer and then we can get started. So I'll ask you to join me in the sign of our faith. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We come together in hope from different community groups, answering the same call to service, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in gratitude for the trust placed in us, for the opportunity to serve, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in respect, aware of our diversity, willing to work for the good, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in awe of the wonder and beauty of each of God's children, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in God's name, and as we work together toward the same goal, each piece of the puzzle begins to fit neatly into place, creating a breathtaking picture of love, compassion, courage, and grace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay, so we have our presentation here. So what I would suggest is perhaps we get through the presentation, if everybody is okay with holding their questions until the end, or we can sort of maybe see when we get to a natural break in the presentation, and perhaps that might be a good opportunity to ask questions as they pertain to that particular section. So that might be a good way to do it as well, now that I'm thinking. Let me just admit. Is there any thoughts on that? What would people prefer to do? I'm thinking maybe at the natural break in the presentation. Yes? No? Okay. All right. Well, let's do that. Okay. So let's go ahead. Superintendent Cipriano, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we get started, a couple things. I do want to welcome to the meeting a couple of people that normally would not be part of our SEAC meetings. I'd like to welcome Kim George, who's our Health and Safety Officer. Now, Kim's responsibilities for health and safety, for the most part, for our staff in our schools. Some of the questions that might come up tonight, some of the challenges that we might encounter might have some implications around health and safety from a staff perspective, as it pertains to student supports. So Kim is here just to listen in, and if we need to call upon her, she is ready to support us in that. I also want to welcome to the meeting today our upcoming Superintendent of Special Education, Stephanie Ballo. She is joining us today, and Stephanie comes with a great deal of experience in the logistics and planning for our return to school plan. So she is an expert and can hopefully answer some of our questions that we may have around the health and safety of staff and students, some of the logistics around the buildings, the building protocols, the entrance protocols, busing. Again, with recognizing that there's still some questions to be answered from a provincial and public health perspective. And then finally, I do want to thank our leadership team. Many of our leadership team members are on vacation, and they're joining us tonight from their vacation. Many have contributed to this presentation. Many have been working a lot during the summer when they normally would not be working. And some of our consultants and coordinators and our coordinator are here tonight, and they are 10-month employees that normally are not working in the summer. So I do want to thank them for volunteering their time tonight to not only support our students in our schools with creating and developing this plan, but also for being here tonight to answer some questions for SEAC. So let's get started. We created as you all know, every school board in the province was required to develop a reentry plan for schools. We did, as the Halton Catholic District School Board, we did around certain committee areas, certain pillars. And we recognized probably early on that special education had a different was a part of several committees, but did not have its own separate protocol. So we decided in working with our SEAC chair that we probably should create something a little bit more specific for special education with respect to the very particular and very specific needs of our staff and students that support our students with special needs. So what you have here is some of our collection of thoughts and some of it just real still questions about how school will look like for our students in our schools that are supported by our special education staff. We'll start off with our guiding principles. So our guiding principles really, it was outlining not only the guiding principles for return to school in general, but especially for special education. And you see them listed in the PowerPoint that was sent to you earlier this afternoon by Andrea Hughes. But really, to start off, I mean, health and safety and well-being of our students, of staff and families, so those three groups, is our number one priority. We recognize that this is this pandemic is a once in a lifetime or once in a generation, once in a century type event that ultimately our first priority is making sure that our students, our staff, and our parents and families are safe. We also recognize that this has had a significant impact on the mental health of our students, staff, and families. Again, we've been very intentional to name not just students, but staff and families as well. We recognize that being away from school, the impact it's had on our students, the impact it's had on our families and staff has created some significant mental health challenges. And so we want one of the priorities, guiding principles, is to make sure that we recognize this, it's in the forefront, and that we're developing and promoting mental health supports in our schools. Another guiding principle is we need to recognize that we are an education system. We are a school system, and so quality Catholic education is going to be a priority. But recognizing that we are in a unique situation, that we need to be flexible. And education needs to be engaging, but it needs to be flexible because some of our students will still remain at home in an adapted education model, and some will be coming to school. And even those that are coming to school, school's going to look different, and so we need to remain flexible. Another guiding principle is around the idea that our schools are community hubs. And so we need to not forget that we need to continue to build and maintain that sense of community that our schools have. For example, September typically is a very community building month for our schools. Curriculum nights, barbecue nights, meet the teacher nights. How will those look like in this new adapted and also return to school model when we can't really meet as large groups, when we can't meet when we can't have external people coming into our schools. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that our students and staff have supports that need to create learning. We needed to make sure that our supports are accessible to all, that our expectations, our learning expectations, that all students are being supported, both in elementary and secondary, and again, especially those students with special needs. Andrew, if you can just flip the slide. Thank you. So our goals as we transition back to school is we want to make sure that our protocols are in place so that everyone feels a sense of security, that our schools are safe places for our students, our staffs, and our families. We want those protocols to be clear. We want them to be very obvious and simple to understand. We wanted to make sure that our distance learning experience is enhanced so that those students and those families who choose to keep their children home for whatever reason, that their experience at home is as similar as possible to those students that are in our schools. Another goal that as we transition back is we recognize that there have been significant gaps. This has not been a typical year. Our students have been out of school since March. There has been distance learning, some synchronous, some asynchronous. And so we recognize that because of those very disrupted type learning environments for our students, there will be gaps. And part of our role going back into schools is to assess those gaps, to support those students and support those gaps. And then finally, I've mentioned this before as one of our guiding principles. It is something that is at the forefront, the idea of supporting mental health supports for students and staff and families, because those students and staff are coming back with a sense of anxiety, a sense of loss in some cases. And so we need to make sure that we are very deliberate and intentional in supporting those individuals. If we can just flip the slide, Andrea, thank you. And then finally, one piece that it might be obvious, but it might not go without saying, but it's important to note that a lot of what we're doing, a lot of the protocols that we're creating, a lot of the procedures that we're creating, a lot of what you're seeing tonight in this presentation really is at the direction of the Ministry of Education and our Halton Region of Health Department. For the most part, they are the ones directing school boards and schools and districts on the parameters around return to school from a health and safety perspective and from a curriculum perspective. So we really have to follow their guidance and their lead when it comes to a lot of the planning that we've been doing. So part of the challenge has been is that obviously there are changing dynamics or there are changing COVID rates within the province, and every region is a little bit different. So we're trying to balance that changing landscape with trying to create protocols and procedures that are consistent for our families to understand in our return to school. So I will now turn it over to, and by the way, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation. We're going to have different members of our leadership team speak to certain parts of the presentation. I call now on Glenda Brown, our Chief of Mental Health and our mental health lead, and possibly Patricia Cotter, if she's joined us, to share with you our student mental health and well-being plan.
Good evening, everybody. I'm just saying hello, and then I am going to turn my camera off as my internet has been spotty. But good evening, and it's lovely to be with you this evening. We know that mental health and well-being for all is a priority as we transition back this fall, as Camillo mentioned and referenced, even more so, especially responding to the challenges of COVID and the impact of that on our students. We are focusing on a mentally healthy return to our school this year, and that is addressing mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, spiritually, and also the students' readiness to learn, given the fact that they have been away from traditional school settings, as Camillo mentioned. We also know that responding, to our students and our staff and our families with compassion and empathy is an absolute essential part and important, recognizing that everybody has responded to COVID in very different ways. Our schools, we know that we will continue, we know that schools are continued to be optimal places to promote and protect our students' mental health, especially given the unique challenges that we've experienced this year. We have established really strong mental health foundations in the past, and we will continue to build on those throughout this year. We are going to focus and continue to implement our tiered model of support and ensuring that we are working collaboratively together. We know that this year there may be students who typically have not received mental health supports in the past may require supports depending on what their experience has been. We will continue, like referenced in the slide, to implement our tiered support for mental health as we have for many years. And like we did respond since March during our COVID, we adopted all of our mental health programs. For example, our Tier 1 support programs, we adopted all of those programs so that they could be delivered virtually. Programs like Mind Up, Healthy Transition, we supported teachers in delivering those Tiered 1 supports. We're going to continue to assess the social emotional needs of students and really make an effort to notice those students who are struggling in particular and notice maybe students whose change in baseline who have never experienced mental health issues before, but ensuring that we're assessing students' level of need, level of support, and especially for those who may require more intense supports. We'll ensure that they are being connected appropriately with two in-school embedded supports, and also ensuring that they get referred to the appropriate supports through our referral process with our mental health agencies. Throughout COVID, we have continued to work very strongly with our mental health partners. We've adopted all of our processes to ensure that they are online, our referral forms, our assessment tools. And so we will continue to ensure that our students are receiving those supports, especially those that are displaying a need for a higher level of support. And we're working and continue to work very strongly with them. On a very short turnaround time in the spring, the CYC's developed a transition resource tool, and it's posted on our board website under our Learn at Home folder, and it's listed under Summer Support Transition Resources. What's wonderful about this toolkit is that it supports parents and caregivers by providing resources organized by grade level. So from kindergarten all of the way up, it has activities and strategies to support students that are developmentally appropriate for them. The response has been very positive, and it does also provide links to our community resources as well. School mental health, last week we attended a meeting where school mental health has developed a mentally healthy return to school toolkit. And we're in the process of reviewing all of those resources to share. But what's wonderful about it is it provides concrete language and messaging and strategies to support at every level. So messaging to trustees, administrators, educators, parents, and students. So we're just in the process of working through those resources to be able to streamline those and perhaps post some of those on our board website as well. We are constantly developing resources that are aligned with our emergent needs and supporting to address the variety of topics mentioned and listed here. One of the things that I also want to note is that School Mental Health Ontario has also developed a supporting mentally healthy anti-Black racism toolkit with very specific language and strategies for supporting educators, parents, families, and other students to really have those kind of courageous conversations that address anti-Black racism and all of the issues that emerge from that. We know that the recent events and the recent protests, have been a trigger for many of our students and our families. And that also affects mental health. So we look forward to receiving those resources as well that will help to support our work and our anti-Black racism response. As it's noted here, schools will also be seeking ways to engage students and families, communities by looking for opportunities socially for families to continue to come together. This is where we get really creative, where schools will be developing opportunities, whether they come together virtually or according to obviously the public health recommendations, whether they continue in the fall to come together in person. But we are looking at ways to ensure that we still bring that school community together, because we also recognize that that is part of supporting mental health. One of the things lastly, I just wanted to mention that throughout the summer, CYC social work and psych have continued to provide mental health supports to our students and families, and that has gone very well. And I just wanted to note that, despite many of the staff who were feeling pretty depleted near the end of the school year, stepped up to volunteer to work through the summer to continue that support. So I just wanted to make a note of that. Patricia, I'm not sure if Patricia is on or if anybody else wants to add anything, but that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenda. And also, I agree with you. I thank you to all of our mental health workers, our CYC social workers, and our psychologists that supported our students this summer in our summer programs. So as we move on into the supports for students with special needs, Andrew, if you can switch the slide to the next, thank you. That first bullet, what you'll see is really outlines our philosophy in special education right from the outset when Minister Lecce in March declared that our schools would be closing initially for 2 weeks and then obviously till the end of June ultimately. What we try to do in special education is to best we could, and I say this recognizing that it was not, but we tried to operate with the idea of trying to go business as usual as much as we could. Meaning that our students with special needs would be getting supports as they normally would, but virtually. If that was EA support, if that was an SLP support, if that was an assessment that needed to be made, if it was an IPRC that needed a meeting that needed to happen. In special education, we tried to the best we could operate in that manner. And so moving forward in our re-entry into our schools, we will continue along that same philosophy. So all students with special education needs will continue to be supported by their homeroom and special education resource teachers, as well as staff as it's stated in their IEP. So that could look like EA support, whether it be remote or in school. It could mean if they're receiving SLP support, CDA support, that would continue again in a virtual or in a real-time way. All of our students in our congregated classes will attend school daily. Now, the reason that that bullet is there is initially the ministry asked school boards to prepare for 3 modes of school to begin in September. One being the traditional, all students all back in school. Another mode was to prepare for continued virtual education as we left schools in June. And then the third would be the adapted model, where the ministry would expect school boards to try to limit the amount of students in cohorts, possibly limit the amount of days students are in schools, and have a hybrid of in-school and virtual. And as all of you probably know by now, our elementary students across the province will be going back to school in a traditional model, all back in school with health and safety protocols in place. And our secondary schools, we are considered a designated school board. Not all school boards, but the school boards in high population areas, most of them were designated special considerations, where our students will be returning in an adapted model, meaning that they're in cohorts, coming to school every other or 2.5 days a week on average over a few months. Their classes are split and so that the numbers in each class are smaller, 15-1, and they also will be receiving virtual synchronous type education while at home. So the bullet around students in congregated classes will attend school daily, that was created when we weren't sure if elementary students would be going back to school full time, which they are now. So that bullet would reflect the expectation for our secondary students in our life skills classes. Those students will be going to school every day with their cohort. And then finally, remote learning will be available where return to school is not possible. So I'd mentioned before, families will have the choice if they feel that their child cannot come back to school in a traditional sense for any number of reasons, whether it be physical reason, health and safety, mental health, a family member who's immunocompromised. We do have an obligation, and we will be supporting those students in a distance remote type learning environment. We will also, so we will also support our students offering daily attendance to students with special education needs for whom adapted timetables or remote learning may be challenging based on student needs. Again, that bullet is initially it was created for our K-12 students when we were not sure if we were going to be moving back into a traditional setting. That bullet now really is applicable to our secondary students, those that are not in a congregated class, but might find the adapted model a challenge, and they students with special needs, high special needs, we could consider on a case-by-case trying to find a model of teaching and learning that would support their needs in and offering daily attendance to those students. And then again, obviously, as we did in the spring, we'll be making sure that all our technology and equipment are accessible to all of our students with special needs, supporting our families from a technology standpoint through our SEAC and other devices. And then again, as always, our programming will always reflect differentiated instruction to support all of our diverse learning needs. Again, and that would be, as you might hear often tonight, on a case-by-case basis, making sure that IEPs reflect the needs of the student, reflect the learning environment of the student, whether it be adapted, whether it be virtual, whether it be in a traditional sense. If we can just flip the slide, Andrea. And now I'll pass this on to Jody, who will speak to this slide.
Good evening, everyone. As you know, in the spring with the school shutdown, we did have to discontinue Empower for our students. And early on, at the end of the year, I would say, we made a decision working with SEAC kids that we would continue Empower in the new school year. So we are happy to report that we will be able to do that. Ashley Fliss, another consultant, and myself are working closely with SEAC kids to continue to create a framework that looks at the intervention delivery as it relates to public health and the safety of our students, but we will be continuing with Empower in the new school year. We're actually meeting with SEAC kids this week to sort of discuss and address any questions or concerns and look at what other boards and how they're delivering Empower as well. Student placement options as per their IEP will be honored. So as you know, the IPRC is, a legal document, and the placement as per their IPRC and on the IEP will be honored in the new school year. What that looks like, again, is still to be determined. That will depend on whether students and parents and families decide to continue with remote learning or if they are going to be in class. So further conversations with the special education department and my colleagues will happen to look at how that will work for these students, but their placement will be honored as per the IPRC and the IEP. And then integration options, in particular with our placement for students in life skills, looking at if it's appropriate for virtually online, will be developed individually with a focus on maintaining cohorts as per the direction of public health. We're following the guidelines and directives around that and keeping the contacts as minimal as possible. So we're still looking at options around those placement for students. But again, as I mentioned, we will be honoring the placement as per the IPRC. Thanks, Andrea. So I think we touched on this, but we will be continuing with IEP development as we normally do with the IEP team, the classroom teacher, the CERT, parents and guardians, and collaborating with everyone to create the IEP for the student. It will go out in the same time frame as it normally does. And we will be looking at whether we deliver those IEPs electronically as we did near the end of the school year. Those details are still to be worked out, but we will be working, as we always do, in collaboration with parents around that development. It might be a phone call, it might be a virtual meeting, but we will be working with you to create the IEPs. The changes in the school environments and or remote learning, so thinking about whether the students returning in school and the environment has changed around them, so some of the accommodations that they require may change, and we will take those into consideration, obviously, when creating the IEP and looking at accommodations. And or if it's remote learning, again, looking at what does that child require for their remote learning to be successful for them, and we will make the changes as necessary in the IEP to reflect that. Finally, the team meetings, IPRC meetings will continue either face-to-face or remotely. I know that in the shutdown early in the spring, we developed a process for IPRC meeting, to continue virtually. I know that many schools continue student success meetings to make sure that we're still meeting the needs of the students. And again, board teams will continue as well. We will ensure that all the professional support services and all members of the team that would normally be with us during those meetings are with us. And we already have processes in place with that. So we will ensure that that will continue.
Hi everyone, it's Jen Thompson here. I'm going to take over this next slide. Thanks so much, Jody. So our special education itinerant staff will be continuing to support their schools. Some of their work will be provided in a virtual way, and they will still be attending schools. They are going to do their very best to limit their visit to one school site per day, so they will not be visiting multiple schools in one day where that is possible. For parents who are choosing the Learn at Home option, there will be some virtual student sessions scheduled to be able to support students in their home learning environment. And our SEAC process will continue. So students will be able to receive SEAC equipment, both AT and mobility equipment. And we will continue to support training to enhance our student access to the SEAC equipment. Some of that training will be done through staff and some of it will be done directly with students. The direct to student training will be done. We are going to continue our partnership with LearnStyle. However, it will be virtual AT training sessions with LearnStyle, as they are not considered an essential service provider, and their training can be provided virtually. We did a lot of virtual sessions with them from March to June, and they were very, very successful. They are also working with the LDAH in providing many virtual sessions, and so they have some very good processes in place to be able to support students. So this way we are able to support them both at home and at school, depending on which options parents choose.
Sorry, when my mic was muted. Thanks, Jen. We, as a school board, we have both a legal obligation through our PPM 140 and 156 and a moral obligation to support transitions of our students with special needs into our schools. And so we have been, we currently are in virtual transitions for some of our students to support their transition back into schools. Typically, those transitions would be for our students with special needs transitioning from one school to the next year to try and understand what or meet their new teacher, possibly transitions from grade 8 to grade 9, transitioning from daycare into schools. Well, those transitions are going to look a little different this year. Again, we are obligated and we will continue to support those transitions. In many cases, they will be virtual transitions, but in some cases, with the proper health and safety protocols in place, we can support traditional transition visits into our schools. And so our CERTs, our department heads in our secondary school, working with our consultants and our coordinator, will be on a case-by-case basis, looking at those students that require those supports to transition back into our schools. We also need to prepare and are ready to support those students who may start the school year in a virtual mode, but will transition back into traditional school at some point during the school year. For whatever reason, they might choose to come back either at a natural break, at one of the approved breaks in the school year. So in those times, our school CERTs, our department heads in secondary will work with our consultants to make sure that those transitions back to school are supportive of our students, to make sure that they're, from a mental health perspective, from an academic perspective, that they're ready to come back to school. And now I will pass this on to Denise to speak to supporting students who are deaf and hard of hearing.
Hi, everybody. I'm really thankful to Rhonda for passing along some information from Voice to help guide some of this discussion. Voice had some recommendations that they wanted school boards to consider, and while a lot of them had been discussions, from the time that school shut down, that document sort of lays out nicely some of the things that are on this slide. So the first is around staff masks. There's been a lot of interest in the masks that have clear panels. Of note is that any masks that staff wear have to be medical grade masks. So we do have some masks that have clear panels on our procurement list. We're still working through what level of protection they provide to staff, and availability will be dependent on the vendors. Just a note about the clear masks. So there's been a lot of studies released recently about the acoustic impact and the speech intelligibility impact of wearing masks. In general, wearing masks act as a bit of a filter, and it dampens the high frequency sounds that are in speech, and also reduces the overall loudness of the speech by anywhere from 2 to 4 decibels for a surgical mask, or 12 decibels for an N95 mask. Sometimes a mic for an FM system will compensate, sometimes it doesn't. The studies around the clear masks are more recent and they're conflicting. So we do know that they certainly dampen the speech sounds more than a surgical mask, so it is harder to hear a person's voice. The studies are conflicting about whether the microphone for an FM system compensates for that for a clear mask or not. What I would say is that we're committed to having a range of options that are safe for staff to use with students who are have deaf and hard of hearing needs, and that we would never presume to decide solely for a student of what works best for them, but we would work with the students to determine, clear mask, surgical mask, microphone, no microphone, those sorts of decisions. In terms of having clear masks available for students, there may be opportunities for students in a class to wear with parent consent a clear mask if there was any opportunities for group work or interaction between students. FM systems are going to be delivered to schools within the first week. Typically, FM systems have been delivered over the course of all of September, but we recognize that they're going to be very important given the masking that will be happening in the schools. So we're committed to getting those out, hopefully at least in the schools for the first day and then set up during that first week. And we're also working with our hearing aid companies to develop tip sheets for teachers to have about how to sanitize the systems between users. In terms of closed captioning, IEPs can be updated to reflect that closed captioning is an accommodation, and actually this was done a fair amount in the spring. So some of that work is already done. We have landed on using Microsoft Stream to caption videos. We find it's just a really good, has a good way to caption videos, and it's also, we can edit it very easily, and it does it very quickly. And then we would continue to recommend Microsoft Teams for live captioning for any synchronous learning that students may be doing from home. Our iCert DHH team will continue to follow the directive that we're anticipating that staff are asked to sort of consider which services they can provide virtually, and the team started to do this in the spring as well, and that they limit their school visits to one site per day. The next slide around third party. So we've been really committed to working with our third party service providers and community partners to ensure that students can access their services whenever possible. We've worked with Aaron and the Lynn nurses who provide dietetics as well as nursing support to our students around how their services will look. We've again asked them to consider what they can provide virtually. Aaron Kids will be providing their speech therapy virtually to start with, but OT and PT visits, in person are deemed essential if there's, if the student is at risk of any decline or not being safe at school. Nursing obviously will need to happen in the school, but students will be pulled out of class for those visits as opposed to nurses going into classrooms. And they will follow all of the essential services, will follow our on-site procedures that are being developed by the board. They will wear PPEs that the third-party providers will provide to their staff, and they will always wear masks when they are in the schools. And now I'll turn it over to Andrea, I think.
I think so. Hi, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of add a piece to your presentation. So I've been asked to speak to supporting students with medical fragility needs. Obviously, all of the presentation that has already been talked about related to whether it be SEA or itinerant support or any other kind of unique needs also, will be applicable to this population as well. But given some of the unique needs of our students with medical fragile needs, we wanted to make sure that we acknowledge some of that uniqueness and kind of captured it in one place for our staff and students to make sure that families know that we are considering this unique population. So we will make sure that all of our school teams, under the lead of the administrator and our spec ed consultants, are providing all of the necessary liaisoning and communication with families to make sure that there are no barriers to our existing supports for our students that are medically fragile. So that would include all of our third-party providers, as Denise has spoken to, any of our itinerant support, any of our nursing care, etc. So that would be obviously applicable if our students are coming into our building. And if they're not, we will ensure, just as we did in the spring, that the supports are in place to continue programming for that student as well. So basically, it isn't going to be, as far as the logistics of it and the pathway that's going to be followed, we're quite versed in our spec ed consultants taking the lead to ensure any kind of transitional support, to ensure communication links between our third-party providers, and to ensure that the whole school team has the resources that they need to ensure that our medically fragile students are adequately supported. And that's not going to change. Just where some of the changes may be is how we do that, and what that looks like. So it could be enhanced PPE for some of our staff. It could be changes to some of the training that our staff get as far as the modality, not the content, but the modality. So we might do some of that more virtually to reduce the number of people in our building. So basically what I think is important to know is that families can expect to be communicating with their school team as they would the start of any other September, to ensure that those needs are met, and that we're going to work collaboratively as a spec ed department to make sure that we're addressing any of those needs and the uniqueness of it. We've also started conversations already with our school-based rehab services committee. Denise Coley sits on that for us. So we've already started those conversations for that, those service providers to start thinking about how they can provide their service, how they can ensure that they're coming into our building following our protocols from a safety perspective, et cetera. We would encourage families to be doing the same, to be contacting their healthcare providers, because as always, we will take direction from those healthcare providers for any of those needs. And then finally, we would work with our transportation system to support any issues related to immune compromised or vulnerabilities, and actually our Halton transportation system has worked very, very closely with the board through facilities and Stephanie Ballow's committee, et cetera, around the extension that the extent that they're going to it to ensure proper cleaning, et cetera, for the particular population, for all buses in general, but especially for that population. So what we would land on that is just to ensure that we're encouraging families to contact their providers and get them in contact with our school teams, and that our school teams under the lead of our principal and our spec ed consultants will be reaching out to families in very early days to get ready and going for September. If our families choose then to continue virtual support for programming for any students that are medically fragile, then of course the supports in place would be more related to programming as opposed to some of the other care that might be necessary. And our educational assistance support could continue in that need as it aligns with the IEP goals and our independent rubric. Thank you.
I'll
there,
call on
everyone.
Stephanie.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you. Just before I start, I do want to thank everyone for allowing me to be part of the meeting tonight. I think it's a great opportunity as I transition into the new role. I am very pleased to be joining Spec Ed, and I certainly look forward to working with the members of SEAC moving forward. Just before I read the slide around the exemptions for mask wearing, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that students in grades 4 to 12 will be required to wear non-medical or cloth masks indoors in school. And students in kindergarten to grade 3 will be encouraged but not required to wear masks in indoor spaces. And with that said, the Ministry of Ed has also outlined a need for reasonable exceptions to the requirement to wear masks, and are expected to be put in place by schools and school boards. So in consultation with public health, prior to receiving any further information from the ministry or the provincial public health with respect to exemptions, this is some preliminary information that has been shared with us as a board that we can speak to with respect to reasonable exceptions, and they are listed there for your review. So number 1 would be anyone who has trouble with breathing issues, for example, a student who may be asthmatic. Number 2 are people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or those who care for or interact with a person who is hearing impaired. Clear masks should be and can be considered, and Denise has already spoken to that. People or those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, mental health conditions, or other sensory sensitivities obviously may have challenges wearing a mask, and a healthcare provider should be consulted for advice about wearing masks. And lastly, younger children may be unable to wear a mask properly, and particularly for an extended period of time, and wearing of masks may be prioritized for times when it is especially difficult. And I would also note that the language that's included in the exemption slide here is in draft, and we're continuing to work with public health for the language that we will include in our material moving forward.
Is it okay? Thanks, Stephanie. So I'm just thinking if we just want to take a pause for a second before we get into the assessments. And I'm wondering, because there was a lot of information that was presented prior to this, and a lot of the information that your team presented have been questions that I have been getting and that have been coming from some of our SEAC members. So around things like masks and support. So I wanted to pause here to see if there was any questions from our SEAC members, perhaps up until this point, on any of the slides or information that's been shared before we jump into this professional assessment piece. Yep, go ahead, Andrea. Sorry, Andrea, you wanted to ask a question?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I thought
Go ahead.
I unmuted the wrong spot. My question pertains specifically to the previous slide. So I don't know if we can go to that regarding the mask exemptions. And I understand this is still in draft, but with respect to the third point specifically, I'd like to understand kind of what that protocol would look like. And I don't understand the point around healthcare providers should be consulted for advice about wearing masks. So I just want to understand, like, what would that protocol be? How would that actually play out to ensure that these students aren't disadvantaged in any way by not wearing a mask? So I just want to understand that a little bit further.
All right, who wants it?
Stephanie, do you want to take that on from your work with public health?
Sure, I can start the conversation, and obviously there's lots to be said around exemptions and expectations. And I go back to the language of reasonable exceptions around the guidance that will be implemented. And I think that reasonable is a very appropriate position to take. And it's also the language that public health has provided. So a school obviously would take a look at a student's individual needs, and they would be included, a parent would be included in the return to school planning with school-based staff. We're not looking at excluding students from school, so I want to be clear about that. And I think that the conversation that happens at the school level is key when we're looking at supporting students who are in classes. The exemption process, as far as I understand, will be made by and through the school principal. That's also been outlined through the Ministry of Education information with the guidance of school boards. So as I mentioned, we're working through what those protocols will look like. And I would also add that in my conversation with public health earlier today, Dr. McGanny, who's the chief medical officer, she actually has a meeting this week with other provincial health agencies at the provincial level to look at what exactly that process would look like and what needs to be considered. And as soon as a process is available, it would be communicated with parents. But again, I feel confident in the language of reasonable. I think we really need to be reasonable when we're dealing with and trying to support all of our students and our families.
So that's helpful. So we don't see them, like, they'll still be integrated in their class and just be able to not wear a mask.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, Andrea, did you have a follow-up question with that, or are you okay?
I'm okay.
Okay, perfect. Michelle, you had your hand up?
Hi, I have a question. What type of mask will the teachers be wearing? I know that my son has an insanely hard time wearing a mask, keeping a mask on. He can't even look at me wearing a mask. What are the teachers like? Are they going to be wearing the clear mask where he can actually see their faces and not be so frightened? And what happens when, I guess, if all the other kids are wearing masks, but the same thing happens? Like, how do we work within the classroom to calm nerves over not being able to see the faces? Because it's turning into a major, major problem at our house.
Sorry, Madam Chair. For me, I'm not sure if it was everyone, but that cut out quite a bit for me. Might be my own internet, or if that was everyone else's.
Do you mind repeating it, Michelle? Sorry, your point was a good point.
No problem. I'm just concerned. Masks are a big problem in our house. And so I'm wondering, what are the teachers wearing? Can it be the clear mask so that the kids can see the teacher's face and not be so frightened? And then what happens with the other kids in the class? Like if they are in, a secluded classroom where everybody has special needs, how do they deal with the kids that just can't see the people wearing masks? Like masks are a huge problem at our house. And I'm just wondering what's going to happen around that.
Thank you. And I'd welcome any other of the leadership team to weigh in here. It is a question that's been coming up provincially with some of my superintendent colleagues around special education. And as we get closer to startup, it is a concern that some parents have started raising with schools and school boards around the idea that for some of our students, and not necessarily students only on the autism spectrum disorder on the spectrum, but students, younger children are experiencing fear of seeing adults or some of their friends in masks. So we did talk about this today, and I'm not sure if Jody, if you're on the line still, we did talk about having to support those students in a very deliberate way, recognizing that we need to meet the health and safety protocols established by Halton Health, by the Ministry of Health, at the same time supporting those students. So again, I don't. If anyone else, Jen has a
I've got Jen. Jen's got her hand up.
Go ahead, Jen.
Hi, yeah, so we actually did talk about this today. Right now, we are running a 2-week summer school transition program, and this has come up in our program. So we are working with families on creating social stories and videos to be proactive with students who are coming back to school and to try to alleviate some of those fears. We are also working on a few strategies such as having kids develop or create or draw out their own masks, working with very, very slow introduction of masks where it may be just that the student is just holding the mask for the first little while, just doing our very best to be proactive in preparing them, from now till the time that they come to school, and getting them used to the idea that their teacher may have a mask on, that other students in the class may have a mask on, and really just trying to work with them to make it a little bit easier for them to be able to see that when they get to school.
Sure, I see Denise, and Denise, do you want to add? And then I think Jody wants to add as well. Denise, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in, Michelle, that we certainly recognize, especially for our little people that have had a lot of interactions at hospitals, that seeing a mask can be very scary and frightening for them. So helping them also to sort of understand that, the school hasn't turned into a hospital, and nobody's going to, there's not going to be medical procedures or things like that, I think is an important distinction that we also start making for some of our children, because I wouldn't be surprised if they see a mask and then they associate it with being, in a medical center.
Thanks, Denise. Jody, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that the conversation needs to start at the school level as well when thinking about the transition plan for our students, so that if parents are aware, as you are in your case with your child, that there is a fear around mask and others wearing masks, or there's a situation where they can't wear masks, to bring that to the school's attention, to the CERT's attention, to problem solve about how to help support that child during this transition. We are creating some resources with our BAs and the work we're doing in this transition program that we have running right now to look at all of these issues. As Jen mentioned, someone mentioned it today, that they're very scared about the masks. So I would encourage all parents to, and we will encourage our staff as well, to ask that question and make sure that a plan is in place, that if the child does have a fear of masks, that we address it, whether it's a social story, whether it's a short introduction, a video that they might be able to watch, and having those conversations.
Thanks, Jody. And I know Marika and Maria have their hand up, but I just want to close this loop. Andrea, was your local Richie, was your hand up regarding the mask or a different question?
It was still about the masks.
Okay. Do you want to ask it?
Sure. Just again around the wording of the third point. So I understand that wording will be worked on, but that covers like behavioral, like it covers behavioral as well, and things such as ADHD, correct? Because the wording here is based on, I think, what I've read in the Halton kind of wording or city wording, but this will be adjusted to reflect school terminology.
I can respond if you'd like.
Sure.
Yes, it will be. So this is the language that came from Halton Public Health when we asked for some advice, and we need to work on the language as a school board.
Okay,
that's a good question, Andrea. Thank you, because I did have a similar question as well. I know that there are going to be children with physical disabilities also, or who may have other things going on that are going to, they'll actually probably physically be unable to wear a mask because of the equipment that they have with them. So yeah, so I know that the sentiment behind this point is that that we are including all of those exceptionalities, but I guess when we don't see it listed there, it's good to see it. I think if we could include that wording.
And I appreciate that. That's why I mentioned it when I even read the slide, because I wanted to be clear that it was draft language, and we definitely need to make it inclusive of our Halton lens.
Great, thank you so much. And just while we're on the mask conversation, how are we thinking we will handle? So I'm looking at, let's say there's a child who's in a regular stream, they're unable to wear a mask for a variety of these different reasons. I'm wondering if we are anticipating, or how we would handle possibly any pushback from parents of students in the class who may not be comfortable having one student not wearing a mask. I know that those are what if, could have, but I worry about that child in the class who's not able to wear a mask, and then possibly having other students or having parents have an issue with the fact that that student can't wear a mask. I mean, how will we propose to handle that?
I can try and answer that, Madam Chair. So again, you mentioned that it would be case by case. We are anticipating some parents having concerns if there is a child with an exemption in their child's class, especially if if their own child might have a condition, pre-existing condition that might make them at a higher risk, or that they're living in a home with someone with a higher risk. We will, in those instances, deal with them on a case by case with the principal, most likely the superintendent, very likely the individual that we're replacing Stephanie Ballo as our superintendent of medical conditions, and working closely with our regional public health officer. Again, in these cases, we will take our direction from public health in trying to weigh the needs of an individual who might have an anxiety towards wearing a mask or seeing others with masks, weighing the needs of that child versus a child who might be compromised, their health be compromised by not having everyone in the class wearing a mask. So we'll do our very best. At times, it might mean, if we know the information early on, it might mean helping principals in creating those class lists As you all know, we haven't created class lists yet. We don't know which families have decided yet if their children are going to be returning to school. Once we have those somewhat concrete numbers, we will be creating class lists. If we get any of those types of requests from families, that information will definitely help principals decide on creating those classes. Obviously, our larger schools will have more flexibility in those class creation opportunities. Our smaller schools, that might be the challenge. If you only have one grade 3 class or one grade 5 class and you have competing needs, that might be where we might have some challenges, and we will deal with those on a case-by-case basis.
All right. Thanks, Camilo. Okay, so I'm going back up the list. Marika, you had a question?
You kind of just answered it. I was actually just going to make the comment that yeah, I'd be very concerned about students who would be stigmatized for not wearing a mask, and how would the other students respond to that and the families? Because, you know, you can be sure if you go out in public these days and you're not wearing a mask, you're going to end up on some Facebook page where everyone's,
Yes.
you know,
Shaming.
yes, shaming you. So, and even my kids know, oh, you know, everyone needs to wear masks. So how do we have a healthy conversation with the students in particular too about those kids, where, and also to make sure that those ones who are not wearing a mask for exemptions for medical reasons aren't feeling singled out by it.
Brenda, if I can answer, and I see Stephanie's hand is up. I'm not sure if that was earlier for that earlier question, and that's an excellent question about the social stigma right now with not wearing a mask. Our principals meet with all of our students at the beginning. In a typical year, our principals will have school level assemblies, grade level assemblies, to talk to students about the year, about the expectations, about behaviors, about appropriate behaviors, about inappropriate behaviors. We will be meeting with our principals in the coming week to talk a lot about, obviously, our return to school plans, but also to talk about how their normal September practices will have to be will have to accommodate what we're dealing with now. And part of that accommodation will be in their conversations in those grade level assemblies, and whatever the format that might look like. It might be virtual, it might be class to class, it might be over the PA system. That precisely needs to be addressed in a very deliberate way to make sure that our students all know that there might be children in our school, in our community, that cannot wear a mask for whatever reason, and that they have that right to not wear a mask. And so that, you know, the comments and in that shaming, that public shaming, is not appropriate and not acceptable. And that will be part of the conversation we have with principals in just some tips and reminders as we move into that, you know, that second week of September, in what would normally would take place in our schools, how that needs to look different in this new world that we're in, including again, some of those behaviors that would be inappropriate. I'm not sure. Stephanie, did you have any more information around?
Did you want to add something?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I was just going to chime in with what Camilo just talked about. And I also think it's really important that we take a proactive approach and we focus on the education and awareness pieces for all families. And as Jody mentioned, we do have a number of resources that are being developed to support students with the transition back and feeling more comfortable with adults and other students wearing masks. And I think it's also important that we include that awareness for all families. And we have been working on a student-friendly, family-friendly list of resources that would go out to all families, just again to reinforce the messaging. And if you haven't had the opportunity to watch the most recent video that Dr. McGanny put together from Halton Public Health, a big focus, in addition to wash your hands, et cetera, all the important protocols, was that kindness and acceptance. And I think that that's a really important approach to take with all families.
Thanks, Stephanie. Is there a way that you could share that video?
I can. It's been tweeted, and I know that Halton, I can send you the link, no problem, but we've tweeted it as well as a board.
Perfect. Just for maybe parents who aren't on Twitter, I think it'd be great if we could share it even with our SEAC group, and then they could maybe share it with their associations. That would be great if you don't mind.
I can send it to Andrea.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Maria, did you have a question?
Well, you and Marika stole my thunder because I basically had the same question. So there's been lots of discussion, lots of good discussion. And I think the only thing I would add to it is to remember that it's great that the principals are having these conversations. I mean, that's what, that's how you address it. But just to remember that a lot of bullying happens outside of the sight of teachers and administrators and so on. And we all know that there's heightened anxiety going back this September for everybody. So that's just my only other comment that I would put out there.
That's a great point. Okay, Michelle, was that it, Maria? Did you have a follow-up, or was that, I'll go to the next person?
No, that's it on that.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Michelle, you had your hand up?
No, it was just to say, basically, I wanted to make sure that the other kids and staff were also educated on why some people can't wear them, why some people may, have a fit, basically seeing other people wear them. I'm just really worried about, we've seen in our own home when we leave the house, the lack of understanding from grown adults who don't understand and can physically see, this child is clearly different from others, and they still shame us in public. And I'm very worried about that continuing at school.
Yeah, and I think your point again is very, I mean, we I try not to bring personal stuff into our meetings here, but I do agree with you. We're having the same situations here, and my son actually wants to wear a mask. He's super excited. He wants to go to Amazon and constantly look for masks. But the reality is that, physically he's probably not going to be able to keep one on for a variety of different reasons. And he is worried. He's getting anxiety about not having a mask on around his friends because of what they're going to be saying. So he's worried that he's going to be even further ostracized. And for a child that already has, the typical child, we worry about bullying for sure, but for our children who are more vulnerable, who already have something that sets them apart possibly from their peers, this to me is another challenge in that respect. It's one more thing that might set them apart from their peers in the classroom. So I think that a number of us are obviously concerned, and it sounds like hopefully there's going to be some planning around those conversations at the school level. So Camilo, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just one final thought. Well, not for me, but we do have 3 PA days planned for our staff prior to school starting. There are some topics and priorities from the ministry, including mental health, including the new math curriculum. But around the mental health piece, this will definitely be part of that conversation with our principals and teachers and staff and EAs. That'll be all part of, and ECEs, that'll be part of those initial meetings before we even get back into school. Again, these are new times for us. These are new issues that we will have to be dealing with. And my guess is we'll probably be dealing with issues that we're not even really considering at this time, because when we left in March, we didn't have kids in masks. We didn't have adults in masks. So Maria Lorenko made a great point that a lot of bullying takes place outside of view of adults. Absolutely. We will, as always, we will have to rely on our students in telling their teachers when they're feeling that whether they're being picked on, whether they're being ostracized for any reason, whether to be wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. But I can tell you that this will be a big part of our PD prior to our first day of school with our children in our buildings. We will be sharing with teachers some of those ideas that you spoke to tonight about how, and normally bullying prevention is always a big part of teacher and staff PD. This one will take on a different light in the sense that we are dealing with an issue that we've never had to deal with before, but it will be addressed during those PD sessions with our staff.
Great, thanks, Camilo. I had another question as well, and maybe not so much a question as a clarification. And the question came up at our last board meeting, Camilo, and you spoke to it. We had a question around EA supports. And I know there's been some touching on things here from a support perspective, but I think it'd be great if yourself or Andrea or Stephanie, whoever it was, could speak a little bit more about just what that EA support might look like. I know that there's been some parents are concerned about EAs being shared, what that model is going to look like. I'm speaking almost specifically at this point about in school attendance. But I think
Sure.
it's important. I know that there's going to be people who are going to be listening to this recording that are going to have questions around that EA support piece, because I think it is going to look different. So would you mind touching on that a little bit?
Sure. And then I'll start the conversation, and then if any one of my team would like to add in. So we have talked about this, and again, once we have a better understanding of the number of students that are coming back into our traditional classroom sense, both in elementary and secondary, we'll have a better understanding of our needs and our student needs with respect to EA support. Whereas in the past, our philosophy has been to try and build independence. We try and limit the exposure, the one EA with one child, and we try and build a variety of EA support with student needs in order for one child to not be so reliant on the one individual. We will be changing that philosophy this year. Working with our principals, and our CERTs and our department heads in secondary, we will be issuing some reminders of trying to do the opposite, limiting the number of number of student contacts with different EAs. What that means is creating class lists to try and have similar type needs, students with similar needs, in order ideally to have an EA work exclusively if possible, in limited number of classrooms. That might not always be possible. Again, these are considerations that we will ask our principals to make when creating class lists, recognizing that we have really been intentional in trying to support very specific needs of students with EA support. And most kids in our system, looking at 2019 numbers, most of our students in our schools that receive EA support typically don't receive a full-time EA one-to-one all-day support. So we are trying to again, the philosophy is that we're going to let our principals know to try and create class lists that group students of similar needs into classes. I know that, if I'm not mistaken, that's what the direction is with regard to students that have English as a second language needs, trying to group those students together so that their ESL teacher can meet with them in that similar cohort. And we'll be doing similar things in special education, trying to be very intentional in grouping students in order to limit the number of adults that they may have to work with. That may mean from an EA perspective, that may mean from a placement, those students that need to be withdrawn as part of their IPRC decision. Andrea, sure.
Yeah, Andrea's got her hand up. Thanks, Camilo.
Sure.
Thank you. I just also wanted to add that it might be helpful for all of your families to know that from a staffing perspective, we continue to work with our Human Resources Department and have been for several months to move forward with all of our staffing needs. So we're not kind of holding anything back. So we are working to fill all of our needs and make sure that that we meet our staffing requirement based on our, independent rubric process that we did way back in May. So that might be helpful information as well to know that we do continue to make sure we're filling all of those jobs that we anticipate needing.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. Was there any more questions on this section before we move forward? Nope. Okay.
Brenda, sorry,
Yeah.
I did have a question. Sorry if we're just closing up the mask piece around the documentation of exemptions, like how they'll be documented and the timing of when that would happen. I just wanted to understand, is that something that would be part of an IEP or and like in such a way that all the teachers understand, right? That and all the caregivers understand at the school, so that that the student isn't kind of put on the spot.
If you'd like, I can begin, Madam Chair, and then maybe I'll ask Stephanie Ballo if she has more information. In this case, Andrea, that's an excellent question. Obviously, we want to maintain the confidentiality of our students in our schools with regard to their medical conditions or any types of other requests that their parents are making on their behalf. So in this case, again, and I'll let Stephanie maybe confirm this, the request for an exemption to a mask wouldn't be made necessarily to a teacher or to a cert, but to the school principal. And so the school principal would have a would be document this request, and they would share that information on a need-to-know basis with staff that would be interacting with that student. It wouldn't be communicated out to the entire staff unless, obviously, that it would need to be, so that child would not be asked, repeatedly why they were out of a mask. So again, I'm not sure if we've created yet the communication protocols or the recording protocols, Stephanie, yet, but at this time, that request would be going to a principal. They would be having that conversation with parents, and then they would be sharing that information, if approved, with the appropriate staff in the building.
Through you, Madam Chair, I can add if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah.
So I would just concur with what Camilo said. The documentation direction at this point, it will be communicated once we have a very specific process. As I mentioned, public health is in further consultation this week with provincial agencies to talk about what is the documentation requirement. As far as we're concerned at this time, it would just be going through the principal, notifying the CERT, so that we can best support the student. And the question was around timing. It would be probably the week before school begins, so part of that transition discussion visit.
Great. Okay, thanks, Stephanie. And I just had one more question. Sorry, I'm going back a minute. I'm just going to go back to the EA piece for a second. Is there any anticipation that, I know that there's been a lot in the news about board reserves possibly being freed up and looking at the possibility of hiring additional staffing. But is that something that we're looking at, if need be, to hire additional EA support for spec ed? Or are we waiting on to see exactly how many students we have coming back into the classroom?
I would suggest that we wait to see what kinds of needs we have. Again, we really don't have an idea, because we recognize a lot of our students with special needs also might have other medical conditions. Some of them are medically fragile, and may be deciding to not come back to school. A lot of those students do receive EA support. Many of them receive full-time EA support or more than one EA. So we wouldn't be able to make those decisions really until we have a more fulsome understanding of the numbers and the types of supports that are needed coming back. And I see Andrea's got her hand up or comment to make.
For sure. Yep, go ahead, Andrea.
Thank you. So I just wanted to add to that we would still want to work with our spec ed consultants around the the efficacy of our process around allotting EA support through our independent rubric and all of the work that our consultants do. I do think that, with COVID being a new need that we're navigating, it might add to or enhance some of our criteria around that. And that's something that I know that our consultants, will be looking at, about that they're always looking to enhance and develop our independent rubric process to ensure that we're matching the needs of our system live at the moment, but that we do want to make sure that we are using the system that we have in place when we are making a determination about increased support, et cetera.
Just a follow up on the PPE piece as well, or not even a follow up, but just while I'm thinking about the EA, I'm thinking about PPE. We've talked about it from educators. We've talked about basic PPE allocations and training for our EAs as well. But are we anticipating that they'll essentially have the same type of PPE? So let me rephrase that. So if you have a child in the class who requires full EA support, and perhaps they have some kind of medical fragility, or they have, the need for a lot of PPE from the person they're working with, would the EA have to have more PPE than the teacher would have, or could the teacher, because I'm also looking at it from I'm always cognizant of what we put on our EAs. I'm always cognizant of the expectations on them and who they work with. And will some of that be left up to the parents? If they don't need excessive PPE, they could comment on that. Can we talk a little bit about that PPE expectation?
Can I start with that Can I start generating that conversation? So we've done an extensive amount of work with our committee members and our HR department and our health and safety officer around the need for PPE in general in the board, and very specifically about educational assistance. So we will be providing like an enhanced stock supply of PPE for our educational assistants. So there is a formula that the ministry laid out around determining the number of PPE that's required. And then we actually enhanced that for our educational assistants because it wasn't specifically laid out in the document from the ministry. So we almost doubled it, not quite, but we almost doubled it for our educational assistants, knowing that not all EAs will need all of them. And so it kind of builds a bit of a reserve. Sure. So there is also enhanced PPE for depending on the tasks that are provided. So anytime that there are bodily fluids, exposure to those types of things, the educational assistants will also be wearing gowns. So it is the public health document and the document from the ministry that is directing the PPE requirements. And PPE requirements are a legislative provision to address risk in the workplace from the Ministry of Labor. So we don't have a lot of flexibility in lots of scenarios. So if there is a known risk, we must provide the appropriate response to ensure that we're addressing staff safety. That being said, there's anytime if it doesn't compromise the risk to staff or student, would we want to be flexible, like the conversation about the masks and some of the challenges that an individual child might have if somebody's wearing a mask. So we would want to work with the whole team to make sure we're addressing things in a creative way to meet the student needs, but we are obligated to ensure that we're addressing staff, any risk to staff and students, but from the Ministry of Labor perspective, it's staff perspective.
For sure. That's a good, it's important for us to hear that piece as well, Andrea. So thank you for that. Did any other staff want to weigh in, or I can go to the next question? I think you answered it pretty well, Andrea. Yeah, okay. I'm going to go, Marika, you had your hand up?
Yeah, it's just more of a comment about the EAs and the allotment of EAs. And I think Autism Ontario came out with a very comprehensive survey that they sent out to families. And I think just being cognizant that a lot of these students are coming back with increased needs, and those are just the students that we're aware of. And I think one of the things the families have felt the most need is for the need for internal supports. And I'm just concerned what that's going to look like and how that's going to be addressed, and maybe also looking at the timeline of how we're going to be contacting families to have those conversations so we can assess what the needs are now. Yeah.
Okay. Did anyone want to comment? Sure, Jody, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, hi, thanks. Yeah, that's a really good comment to make and concern to raise. We're always looking at the needs of our students, and we recognize that even in a given year without COVID, those needs change. So that conversation should begin at the beginning of the school year. If it's appropriate, there's a transition plan visit planned in the IEP, then during that time, that would be the time to raise it and discuss some of the concerns you have about what sort of accommodations and support can be put in place. We always look at the wide variety of resources we have. So it might be appropriate that we increase EA support. It might be that they require some CYC support. So it's starting that conversation off at the beginning of the year with the teacher and the CERT to look at those needs, because at that time our students, they ebb and flow, and anytime they increase their independence, as you know, our philosophy is we give them that, but we also know that some students are going to struggle, as you said, when they come back to us in September and will require additional support. So it might be an EA again, but it might be increased CERT support. It might be something that will have more support at the forefront, and then we can release that support eventually. So we will continue to monitor that and what that looks like, and we'll address the needs within the school.
Okay, thanks.
That's perfect. Thanks, Jody. Marika, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I just wanted to, I think it is a concern for a lot of families. And what would happen if they didn't have a transition visit lined up? Would CERTS be contacting families to have those conversations and to see where the kids are at?
So in many cases, we actually plan for transition visits for many of our students in June, and prepare for that. If the transition visit isn't part of the IP, hasn't been planned, but you feel it would be appropriate, in the very least, to have that conversation, that I would suggest that families reach out to CERTS. We still may work through summer processes, recognizing that given these times, it might be appropriate to send out more direct communication. And so we'll work with the special education consultants in our CERTS to see if that's needed. But we also know that some students are going to be okay coming back to school and may not require that. At the same time, we have to be flexible in recognizing that students that may not traditionally have transition visits may require, in the very least, a phone call from the CERT. And parents are always welcome to call the school. It is open the week before school starts to ask to speak to the CERT or the classroom teacher as a starting point to talk about how they can best be supported.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jody. Maria, you had your hand up?
I did, and while I was waiting, I developed a second question based on some of the conversation. So they're not really related, but if I can ask both, because they sort of are related to what we've been discussing. So one was about, the EA allocation, and Camilla was saying we have to wait. We don't know who's coming back to school, etc. But students who are staying at home, they're choosing remote learning, but they're still full-time students of the board, right, who are entitled to an education. I understand some of maybe the self-care issues would not be there, but they would still they still not be entitled to an EA, or, they're still full-time students. I'm just wondering, how much does that really impact whether they're coming back or not, the EA allotment? So that's my first. The second question is kind of unrelated, so if I can put that one out there. Does that make sense?
I can try and answer. I understand what you're asking, Maria. And what I'd said, it wasn't, and I apologize if it came across that students that would be choosing to remote learning, distance learning, would not be receiving EA support if they're entitled, or if we had determined in the spring through our independence rubric process that they would need EA support. They would still have that EA support. We did realize in the spring, when we were supporting students virtually with EA support, the timing was not the same that would normally be in regular traditional sense. So what I meant by that is that we would recognize either that we might need different types of EA supports in different school settings. And as Marika mentioned earlier, we might find, because the independence rubrics, the factors that go into determining EA support did not have factors such as anxiety around, COVID-19, anxieties around mask wearing, supports that students might need that we didn't really plan for. We do need to relook at what our supports will look like come September. All I'm saying is that there's a lot of unknown factors still that, Brenda had asked the question from a are we hiring more EA standpoint? And so the response was, we really are not in a position at this moment to make those types of decisions.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that. And my other question, which I had during the presentation, but I was kind of holding it with a list of questions. But because it was sort of just referenced about students requiring supports for transition. And again, that there may be students this year who don't, wouldn't in a normal sort of year require that extra support, might not be part of their transition plan. But maybe because of the circumstances, they do need some extra support this year. And it was, mentioned that the parents could call the school's open the week before, and they could call to arrange for that. So I just want to flip that around again, because I know this point has been made before, is that parents don't always really know that's available, and or they're apprehensive to reach out. So I would like to see if there's a way that parents can, like even a mass email to say, if you're feeling that your child needs extra supports, here's what you can do, so that the initiative is coming more from the board rather than expecting parents to kind of to know and to know what to do. So that was just my other point that I wanted to bring forward.
Thanks, Maria. Was there any comments on that? I mean, it's, just piping in here, my own 2 cents. I don't disagree. I know that, I know that staff always does a tremendous job trying to make sure that all of this information is available and making sure that they've thought through these things. And we do know that sometimes there is a gap getting that information to families. And I feel like sometimes that's where things get a little bit off track, is when we see, that lack of communication being shared, and it's not, ever intentional. But I mean, I think if we could find a way, and maybe that is, maybe that's letting the certs know to let the families know that they can contact them if they have anything going on, or because I do think it might be difficult to leave it to the parents if they're not aware that they should be doing that. I think, on SEAC, we sort of take for granted that a number of our parents are very engaged, they're quite knowledgeable, they're aware of what's going on, they're strong advocates, but I don't know that that is necessarily the case with all of our special needs families. So I do worry that sometimes they don't know to make that phone call, or they don't know to reach out. And it would be great if we could find a way to empower them with that information so that they knew they could do that. I don't know the best mechanism for that. Like Maria said, is that an email? Is that a reach out from the cert? I don't know what that looks like, but I just feel like a lot of the issues that we see come and bubble up to the surface is just because something hasn't been shared. And again, not intentionally, but that's usually where things go sideways, if that makes sense. So anyways, thoughts? Jody, do you want to pipe in, or Camilla, whoever?
Yeah, I was just going to say I can respond, and I really appreciate that, and I absolutely understand what you're saying, and it's balancing the needs and the of the parents and the child, and recognizing that certs might have 30 kids in their caseload, and we don't have the time prior to the start of school for all 30 students to come in or have those transition visits, but we want to make sure we're meeting the needs. So we appreciate the feedback, and we will certainly go back as a department to figure out and determine a way that we can make it work, that parents know and understand that there are supports available, and balancing all of that has to be done in the week prior to school, and supporting as we can.
Absolutely,
so thank you,
Jody, and I appreciate that too. Like the last thing we need is to have certs inundated with 30 last minute requests for transition meetings if those haven't happened or whatnot. And so I think we all totally appreciate that. And so maybe again, it's just a reach out to sort of say, and we see this happen with different things, right? We see it happen with IEPs or IPRCs or things like that. People are just not aware, especially parents that are earlier on in the process. I think about parents that are maybe, their kids have only been in school a couple of years, and now they're hit with a pandemic, and they're not sure about how this transition piece works anyways. And so I think it's really just letting them know that if they do have any questions or concerns, to just go ahead and reach out. And I think that it's probably more imperative now too, because I know we have a survey coming out. I know we're going to be looking for parents to comment if they're sending their kids back. And I feel like some parents are not going to know how to make that decision if they're not sure some of the things that are out there. So maybe that's, building up our FAQ a little bit more robustly. And then maybe it's just an opportunity, a general email just to say, listen, here's a list of resources for you, or here's whatever that looks like. Jody, I don't want to tell you how or what to communicate, but I think some communication would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's great feedback. And we will definitely work to create something that, is supportive to parents in that transition.
Thanks so much. Camilla, did you want to say something? I saw you unmuted and then you muted.
Yeah, no, Jody mentioned it again. We try and balance obviously, and Maria makes an excellent point. A lot of our parents might not know that they have the ability to reach out to a school. A lot of our, I'm proud of our school certs and that they typically know, again, in a normal year, they typically understand those students that need that support. They know the families that require that extra little bit of loving care in late August, early September in those transitions. This is a unique year. We recognize that. We might have students that we would normally not consider require a transition visit, but need one. And to be honest, we might have some students with some anxieties that are not, on our special education caseload, that don't have an IEP, that might need some type of extra support from a mental health perspective, from a transitioning perspective. So we balance that with the idea, if we send out a mass email, are we going to overwhelm the system with, a demand that we can't meet? And so while I appreciate Maria's suggestion, I think it does make a lot of sense. It really does in theory. My fear is in practice, it might are we going to set ourselves up for more disappointment from parents saying, hey, I reached out and because of the overwhelming need. So what we can do is again, in meeting with our principals and meeting with our CERTs, remind them to look at their caseloads, look at those students on their caseloads, and look at those families that they have a suspicion or that they know might require that extra level of support in transitioning. And if they've heard from parents, because a lot of our principals have been hearing from families over the spring and into the summer, that whether their child has been struggling, maybe reach out to those families who normally wouldn't even be part of this conversation to see if they need some type of transition support.
Great. Thanks, Camilo.
Thank you.
Marika, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, it just reminded me, there was the conversation about the resource toolkit. I'm not sure that a lot of families know that that's there. So that would be something that perhaps, again, trying to find a way that works for everyone to get that out to the families. It might help with a lot of questions they may have, or if there's another way of, because I don't think typically a lot of families go on the website perhaps and are aware that those resources are there.
For sure. Jody, you wanted to comment?
Yes, actually, just to say we're working on it. So that's why it hasn't been shared yet. But we will make sure that, it's a work in progress, let's just say, Marika. So we are working on it, and I'm working with Andrew Swindon and Stephanie and Camilo in our spec ed department to look at what resources we can provide and how best to house them and how to share them. So we're still working through those details.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Thanks, Jody. Well, let's go ahead and move on. I know that Oliver has been ready for the last little bit. So if we wanted to jump in and start with professional assessment, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. All good.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to start off, and then Denise is going to take over. Denise and I have been working on this because our two disciplines, speech language and psychology, are very similar in that we do very standardized assessments, and that's a big part of our portfolio. And so since the spring, when we were going into the lockdown, we have started to explore options for resuming assessments. And so we have basically done that with a view of all possible outcomes in terms of where we will be, whether we will be providing service to students online or in classrooms or in some kind of a hybrid model. So our planning was basically addressing all those different possibilities. Now, when we look at the current model, we will still have to address all of these options, because we may have some students that have assessment needs, but are where the parents are choosing the at-home learning option. And as well, we may face changes in what the pandemic response is, depending on the course of the COVID pandemic. So we are trying to be ready for all those options. we would definitely prefer to be able to work directly with students for assessments. That is based on our research that we performed for assessments. Now, before I talk about the points there in terms of our process of what we did, is I just want to kind of give a quick perspective in that when we talk about it applies to speech language to a certain degree as well. When we talk about psychology, psychotherapy, there's a lot of research, and that applies to mental health intervention conducted by social workers and other professional colleagues as well. The research in terms of providing psychotherapy or intervention in psychology and related disciplines is very clear in terms of equivalency of virtual to in-person interventions, which may have been surprising to some before the pandemic, but there's a lot of research out there. Now, when we look at the literature on virtual assessment, it's much more difficult. And the reason is that a lot of online assessments that have been done in the past were done before the pandemic, and not with a pandemic in perspective. They were done for other reasons. They were mostly specialized assessments in specific populations that may not be applicable or comparable to the student population. Let's say for dementia screenings, neuropsychological assessments, and such things that are slightly different. With the pandemic hitting, that significantly curtailed the ability to complete controlled studies. So the need to further to get further research to be able to find out how much we can do assessments in a telepractice environment and how that compares to our standardized assessments in person with students is really difficult. I just wanted to mention that because this is really a new field, and when we were attending webinars on virtual assessment, what we were finding is that the presenters were actually saying, "Oh, there is research coming out. I'm writing a book. It's coming out." But these are very, very new. This is a new field, so there's not a lot of guidance out there. So we have to be careful in terms of how we go about doing these assessments and how we interpret these results, because all of our assessments are standardized for a reason, because they provide very important decision-making tools for educational identification, but also clinical diagnosis, and may have impacts over years for students. So it's very important to be very careful when we do these assessments. So we were looking at webinars, as I said. We obviously reviewed the guidance from our regulatory colleges and just generally speaking, the guidance whether we were allowed to work with students directly, or whether it was preferred that we perform our services in a virtual manner. And you may know from working with the associations or from personal experience or hearing from other parents that some of the private practitioners are slowly now going back to doing assessments with developing specific protocols with PPEs, plexiglass, room ventilation, mask wearing, and all these considerations. And all these considerations are specifically critical, but also difficult or even more difficult in assessment because all these PPEs may have an effect on the validity and the reliability of the assessment, because it makes it much more difficult for the student to hear us and to understand our instructions, and for us to be able to observe and interpret students' responses to our standardized questions and tasks. So both our departments have the advantage that speech language and psychology, we both have worked in the past with digital tools. And by digital, I mean, I'm referring to protocol of using iPads to do tests rather than having test booklets and with stimulus items, as well as response booklets, and that the student has so a lot of things that have to be touched and manipulated. We had prior to the pandemic already used Q interactive test modalities with our iPads for intelligence testing and for achievement testing, which helps us now in that when we do in-person testing, there's not as many materials that can be contaminated, and that allow us to keep the distance a bit easier while maintaining standardized test administration. Now, I think I'm going to let pass over to Denise to speak about the different scenarios that we developed and the considerations for the different scenarios for test administration and standardized assessment in schools.
Thanks, Oliver. So the first scenario that Oliver spoke to was full remote administration. Again, this is not our preference, and we would really only consider this if as a region we're moved back to where we were in the spring of regulated health professionals not being permitted to provide any non-essential services in person. It would require fully remote administration. We would probably have to ship out a kit to the student's home that would have document cameras and the necessary equipment for them to participate. We would want to make sure that we're enhancing our protocols to make sure that the equipment is working and the speech is recognized both ways. And as Oliver indicated, this is the scenario that has the most limits on the interpretation of results, just because there's not a lot of research on every single test that we have around the equivalency, especially the equivalency outside of a lab setting. So a lot of times that when they're looking at, a remote administration, they're still in a lab and the person is just in another room in the same building with all of the equipment and technical support being provided. The second scenario is an alternative testing site. This could be an option for students who are needing to be learning at home and are unable to come into the school to be tested. Or again, if regulated health professionals are permitted to provide non-essential services, but for maybe other reasons, schools are not open. This would involve physical distancing and masks to support infection control, cleaning and quarantining of equipment, and possibly plexiglass. Again, because there would be masking involved, we would want to make sure that there is speech recognition. Many of the stimulus instructions or items can only be said once as per the testing protocol. So we have to make sure that the students can understand what we're saying. We're looking into possibly using voice amplifiers to help mitigate the quality of the voice and speech recognition that can happen through masking. And there would still be some limits possibly on the interpretation of results. In-school administration would be for students who are attending school on a regular basis. Again, we would use all the same strategies to support infection control and to enhance the test protocol. The reason there could still be some limits on results is because of the masking and because of the physical distancing would just be different. So we're looking at possibly, for us in speech and language, projecting some of our materials onto, a wall or a screen, and the child, demonstrating their responses farther away. Obviously that, is a different level of self-regulation that's needed to be able to sort of do that, as opposed to being side by side. So there may be some, changes to how confidently we can interpret the results under those circumstances. And I think now we're open to any questions around assessment.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Denise and Oliver. Is there any questions? Yeah, Maria, go ahead.
I guess I'm just wondering, and we may have heard this at the last meeting, I can't remember, but how much of a backlog do we have because we weren't able to do these in the spring?
Well, I can speak for psychology. When we did our last meeting and we were comparing the numbers, we had brought our, if we're talking about kind of wait times between referral and assessment, we had brought down our wait time to 8 to 9 months, and that was in March. So because we were only finishing up some assessments and but didn't start any new assessments, and now we have the summer. While we haven't had any new assessments, but just by the passage of time, that has now gone up to, will be 13 months in September when we start up. So we definitely have a bigger backlog than where we were in March. So the question will be how quickly can we get going, and then when will the new referrals start up again and add to the list? So hopefully we can catch up to some degree in the fall.
Sorry, I was wondering, and maybe you don't have this, but I was wondering how many students are waiting. Like, what does that translate into in terms of numbers of students?
Let me just look. I may have to kind of, can I come back to that? I'll just have to, I have to retrieve my,
sure, of course.
my list for that. Maybe if we can talk about something else while I.
That's fine with me. But.
Is there another, does anybody have any other questions about any of the presentation this evening? Or anything that's come through to you from an association perspective? No. Okay. Is there any comments that anyone wants to make as they pertain to anything for consideration as we move forward in our planning for return to school for any of our groups of kids? I have an easy crowd here tonight. Oliver, I'm trying to buy you some time.
No, that's good. I'm there. Thank you. That was perfect. So we do have on our list currently 205 kids.
Okay, thank you. So Brenda, are we now at the end of the presentation and just like opening it up for general questions?
Yeah, I think so. Is there anything else on the presentation?
No, that was it. That was it, Brenda and Maria. That's the end of our presentation. And again, we have most of our team on the line still, so we'd be happy to answer any questions that either came from the presentation, or if there were questions that you still feel need answered that we didn't really address. Again, recognizing that the answer might be that we don't have answers yet. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but yeah, we'd be happy to open it up to any other questions you may have.
For sure. Okay, does anybody want to start typing in the chat if you have questions?
Brenda, if I could add one last thing.
Of course.
Thank you. It has been helpful tonight. Both, obviously, the questions are very helpful in helping us start framing our thoughts around September. What's really been helpful are some of the comments that have been made about, hey, have you thought about this? Have you considered this? Again, for the most part, it has been in our discussion meetings, but if it's not necessarily a question, but if we haven't really addressed something that you think we possibly might be either not considering for a specific group of students, or for our students with special needs in general, or all of our students, again, we'd be happy to gather that input. If you want to put it in the chat room, if you want to if you want to speak to it. Again, so not just questions, but if you have any thoughts for the team to have as considerations as we continue to build our plan for September, we'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Camilo. A couple of hands up. So Helena, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So I did enter the meeting late, so I don't know, but at our special board meeting, we had a letter from The Voice, and I don't know if Rhonda or Rick are there to go over some of the questions that was in that letter. Don't know if others have seen it. I guess are Rhonda or Rick there?
No, they're not.
Okay.
But Denise did cover off a bunch of the DHH concerns, and I know that she's been connecting and corresponding with Rhonda as well on some of the Voice recommendations. So, okay. At quick glance, Helena, looking at the Voice letter that came and looking at the DHH slide that Denise provided, I think a lot of it has been addressed.
Perfect.
Denise,
that's what I think I may have missed.
Yeah, no problem, Helena.
I'll go over the slide myself.
Yeah, it's in the presentation for sure. But Denise, is that accurate or Camilo, is that accurate in my statement?
Yeah, that letter was shared. That letter was shared with Denise, obviously, and I think she built most of the presentation, if I'm not mistaken, around a lot of those questions that were being raised by Voice. And again, if Denise is there and she has anything more to add, but yeah, Helena, it was. That Voice letter was shared with our entire special education leadership team, in particular Denise, and again, we wanted to make sure that we addressed a lot of that tonight for Voice and then for SEAC in general.
Super, thank you so much.
Yeah, no,
I would
go ahead.
Yeah, I would also just add to that. We absolutely appreciate Voice's input and certainly their letter to help us structure how we organize the information tonight. But our DHH staff are pretty phenomenal, and they were on top of many of these issues, in April and May. So they've been long discussions that we've been having in our board about how to approach supporting students who are deaf and hard of hearing. So I think we're in really good shape, and I'm confident that we'll be able to personalize the supports for students as needed.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. And I feel the same. I mean, again, I don't represent that population, but I do have a child in that population. And I do feel confident that everything from FM systems to masking to, all of that piece has been considered. So kudos to that, the DHH team, because I do feel like a lot of it has been reviewed and done. Michelle, did you have a question?
Hi, I just have a question about how they say if you choose to do remote learning or in-school learning. So how's that going to work with the teachers if, they're in the class with the kids that are showing up in the class? Are they videotaping what they're teaching? Are they doing whole other curriculums? Because now they have 2 jobs instead of 1. So do the kids that decide to work from home going to be with one particular type of student? Is that what you meant by discussing on, who's deciding to come to school and how we organize our teachers, or how does that work? Do I make myself clear about that?
Marika, yeah, you did. Stephanie, do you want to weigh in on this? Because I know that you've been part of the logistics and planning committee.
Sorry, with respect to moving
just
in
how we plan in general, supporting students in virtually who choose to stay home, with respect to the teachers. The question was raised are those teachers going to be asked to record their lessons? So I can speak generally. That won't be the understanding. We, again, depending on the number of students that are choosing that modality of education, we may have to create virtual class, and again, they might be a collection of students at the same school, and having teachers in the schools support them exclusively as their classroom teacher. Stephanie, do you have anything more specifically around that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say not. I think that's been our preliminary conversation at this point, and it really has been dependent on the responses that we also get from the information that we're sending out to families with further planning.
Great. Michelle, did that answer your question?
It does. I just have one, question / concern. So when is the survey going out to asking parents what they plan on doing, and will there be enough time before September 8th for us to know what we're doing?
Good question. We did have it planned for the survey to go out last week. We had our startups planned, and we had some changes at the last minute to our secondary delivery model, and so we had to, in order to be fair to parents, to give them a little bit more information about what that would look like based on the changes, we had to delay our sending out of that request, that survey of what families had intended to do. I know that around the province, most school boards are in the process of gathering that information, and so we're just a few days behind most school boards around the province. Again, only because we had to tweak our plan in the last few moments before we sent out our survey. Stephanie, do you know when our survey is being sent out and when it's closing, when we're receiving that information?
I don't have that. We had some preliminary conversation. I see Pat's on the line and he's offered to jump in.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Pat, go ahead.
Sorry, thanks, Brenda. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Sorry, I'm on my phone, so I didn't know how to put my hand up.
No worries.
Great question, and Camilo answered it partly. We did present a draft plan last week to trustees. There was a number of questions and a couple of things that trustees asked us to firm up and bring back some additional information. So we're going to do that at a special board meeting tomorrow night. So part of it was around a couple of things we were looking at was to have a different proposed delivery.
Oh, Pat, I think we lost you there. Okay, if Pat comes back, we'll let him finish his thought. So, Camilla, did you want to top up on that at all, or?
I'm hoping that Pat. Is
he back?
I thought I heard him for a second there again.
Pat, you back?
Sorry, did you guys? Did I lose you?
Yeah, we lost you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me. You know what? Let me try and. If you give me 2 seconds, I'll try and join on my desktop.
Of course, no worries. I can take a couple other questions, so no problem at all, Pat. I'm just gonna go back to make sure because I missed. Maria, you had your hand up.
I did, thank you. And I have a few questions, but I'll try and ask a couple, and then I think a couple people have their hand up, and then you can come back to me maybe. But
Perfect.
It kind of is similar to Michelle's question, but specifically with congregated classes, right? So Camilla mentioned that those classes will attend daily, and I know they'll be offered daily because our elementary schools are going back full time, and I believe our high school congregated classes will go back full time as well. But not all students will choose to go back full time, right? They have the option of remote learning. So if they're in a congregated class, and I've heard that the IPRC placement is going to be honored, so that's great, because I've heard in some other boards where they're not doing that. But so how's that going to work though? Because, you know, and I just heard Camilla also mentioned about maybe creating some virtual classes with, you know, by combining students that aren't coming back, but you can't really do that in a congregated class, right? So how is that all going to work? How are they going to be integrated into that class and receive their learning?
It looks like Jen's got her hand up for this, because we did talk about these very questions, Maria. Excellent questions.
Okay.
So
Jen,
yeah, I can talk about this. So we did talk about this today at length, actually. We do need to wait a little bit until we do get some of these numbers in, but we are currently right now throughout our summer school, we have offered congregated type class settings with sets running them. So it's really going to depend on how many students are opting to remain at home. We may be able to offer a online class that would be a combination of students from multiple schools. So for example, if we have, 15 kids across our board from ESC classes who are not attending in school, but instead are going to be learning remotely, we would build a community with those students and have them learning online in one classroom with one dedicated teacher for those students. We've actually had really, really wonderful success this summer in building community. So we had our first session, which was 2 weeks early on in July, and we've just begun our second one. And the feedback we received today is kids were very excited to come back and see the classmates that they spent the first 2 weeks with. They were telling they missed each other, and the teachers are really, really excited to talk about the community that they've been able to build even across schools. So we are hoping to be able to offer those specific types of classes to students, but again, we just need to look at numbers and see what that's going to look like. If it's going to be one student, that would be a little bit more difficult versus enough students to be able to make a bit of a class out of it.
Okay, and if I can just follow up on that, so that sounds very reasonable, and I realize that there's no easy answer to any of this, so I don't want to sound critical, but I guess the downside of that approach is if those students decide in October or November or whenever that now they want to go to school, that makes that a bit complicated, because now they're going back to a class that's not the class they've been in. So
yeah,
I'm sure you've considered that.
Yeah, the return to school is going to be at very specific breaks. So for example, students would be offered a return around different reporting times. So at those times, we would then have to reintegrate students who wanted to come back in, and then we would have to just relook at our classes and what that's going to look like. I don't think there's one easy solution to it, like you said, but kids won't be randomly just dropping in and out. It's going to be done only at specific times.
Camilla, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, and Jen actually addressed what I was about to say. I mean, Maria, you make some excellent points. The reality is, if we do it at the front end, if we only create classes of students, we don't know what numbers of students we have. So I think you could appreciate if we only tried to keep students in the same schools and in a virtual sense, in congregated classes from the same school, but we only have 3 or 4 students. Is that truly a class? Are they going to get the same school experience? by being only in a class of 3 or 4. We may have to bring students together that from congregated classes from across the system in a virtual sense, those that choose to stay home. That will give them a better virtual experience, but you're absolutely right. It'll be a challenge if and when they choose to go back to their home school for transitioning. So again, there is no perfect answer. So we either, in some ways we either keep them only in their home school virtual environment, but their education experience is limited because it's a small group. And then but the positive of that is that it allows for an easier transition back into their regular traditional school, or we give them a more fulsome experience in a virtual setting, but it creates challenges in transitioning. So again, these are all, I hope you can appreciate, and again, I get this, I realize that we're saying a lot of we don't know yet, and time will tell, and we will know more as we know more of what the intentions of our families are. But that is our reality. We have some general ideas of how we want to plan for September, but we don't have those real detailed specifics because we don't know what it's going to look like. Are we going to have 20%, 25% of our students staying home? Are we going to have 3%? And so we will act accordingly once we do know those numbers.
Yes, and again, don't get me wrong, I get it, and I don't envy what you guys are trying to figure out here because there's so many moving pieces and it's a bit iterative. You don't know who's coming back, and you can't, things are dependent on each other, right? So I understand that, but I just, and I'm sure you guys have thought about all the pros and cons, but I guess that's why we're here is to make sure that we're bringing those forward. So that's just all I'm trying to do there.
And like I said, sorry, Madam Chair, I'm just commenting without permission from you.
Yeah, no kidding. I'll let you.
Fire him.
You'll be rid of me in 2 weeks. But anyways, but you're right, Maria. Thank you again, because if we hadn't thought about that, these are all, as I said earlier, we really do appreciate some considerations that we've got so many different balls in the air right now. We're trying to juggle all these variables that we might miss something. We might not consider something, in a very unique way. And so we do thank you for kind of bringing it to our attention so that we can, at the very least, again, not have an answer, but at least start turning our mind to being ready once we have more specific information. So thank you.
Jody, did you want to jump in there before I circle back to Pat to finish off his answer?
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to make one quick comment with regards to that transition piece. I think it goes back again, the transition component on the IEP and making that fulsome if the decision is made by the child and families to return to in-school learning versus remote learning. So if we decide that is the model, we will gather kids from different schools and create an online learning, as Jen mentioned. Honestly, it has been fabulous to see the community that can be developed with these teachers and kids, and they were so excited today to see each other. I really see value in that. We have taken lots into consideration, but we will also ensure that a robust transition plan is put in place for the students that do want to return to in-school learning if situations change.
Great, thanks so much, Jody. So Pat, I see that you've jumped back in again. Do you want to finish off your response to Michelle's question earlier?
Sure, thanks, and through you, Madam Chair. So I'm not sure how much of it people heard, but just to recap, we did bring some proposals to the board last week. Trustees asked us to do a little bit more work around some of the detail in the proposals for return to school. At the secondary level in particular, there was a desire to see a different delivery model. So we've been working on that. In terms of the details for elementary, a little bit more detail with regards to how synchronous learning would roll out. And we were at that point waiting for a little bit more direction from the provincial government, which we've since received. So we're bringing some information back to, and sorry, the third part of that was also a request from trustees for the staff to take a look at our ability or what ability we might have to reduce our class sizes in elementary somewhat to try and get them down to 25 for our bigger classes. So those are all some of the things that we'll be talking about with trustees tomorrow night. We're hopeful that the questions that were raised will be answered, and that with those details going forward, we can open up the survey the next day, including those details, as well as some details. Some of the other questions were around if people were opting for remote learning, what would be the opportunities for them to come back to the regular classroom. So we're hopeful that we can get it out on Wednesday. We had originally planned, we had a fairly lengthy survey period, I guess, in comparison to some other boards, but we might have to extend that a little bit on the back end. You're probably aware that some other boards as well have had to kind of put their surveys on hold pending some further feedback from the ministry. So that's a long-winded answer to say we're hoping to get it out on Wednesday.
Great, thanks, Director Daly. Michelle, are you good? I'll move on to the next person. I just want to make sure that answered your question.
Yep, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, perfect. So I know that we've got Marika. Maria, I know you had some additional questions. I also have Tammy waiting. So Marika, do you want to go ahead with your question?
It was actually pretty much answered. It was just going to talk about social opportunities in regards to the online learning component for those who are going to stay at home. And yeah, that's one of the concerns coming from the Autism Ontario community is, yeah, how will we facilitate social opportunities for those kids? But it was already touched on, so.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Tammy, I saw that you had your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. And I apologize if the question's already been asked and answered. There's been so much information. I've been on overload.
No worries.
There's been discussion about families that have decided to stay and do remote learning with looking for opportunities to go back into the classroom. What about the opposite? If you decided to go into the classroom and your child after being there is just over anxious, can't handle being there, what are the opportunities for those students to go into remote learning?
Great question. Anyone want to take a shot?
Tammy, I'm assuming you're asking about all students, correct? Not just students with special needs, but any student that starts in the traditional model and then decides at any one point to go into a virtual model. Is that the question?
Yes, well, I mean, always focusing on students with special needs and mental health and anxiety. But yes, that I would imagine that any student in any stream that would become anxious or develop any mental health concerns about being in the classroom and then wanting to go home and doing it virtually, just if there's accommodations made for that.
I do know that, again, there's still discussions around entry points from a virtual into a traditional. I haven't sat in on the logistics and planning, and I'm not even sure if that would be part of that committee group or the curriculum group. And if Pat is still on the line, and if he has some more information, again, just generally speaking, I would assume that you're absolutely right. There are a lot of logistics in place for all those classes, whether they be virtual or traditional. Their classes, the virtual classes are classes no different than traditional. There's attendance that's being recorded and tracked. They have a classroom teacher. There's synchronous and asynchronous instruction that's happening. So again, without having the luxury of having sat on that committee and knowing what's been discussed, my guess is that there would be similar types of requirements around entry points. Again, I'm not sure if Stephanie, if you have any more information, or if Pat, if you're still on the line, if you do.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Pat.
Okay, sorry, I didn't
That's
know
okay.
whether you, sorry, I was just
No,
waiting
go ahead.
to get brought in. Thanks for the question, and I think Brenda, actually you asked a similar question at board last week regarding if a student starts off. We really always kind of thought of students moving the other way early on, about moving from remote back to the classroom. But certainly I would say for any of our students, but certainly for students, our special needs students who are really struggling, that we'd want to accommodate the desire to move into the online format. I guess the only thing I would say is it might take some time to happen. By some time, it might not be you're in a classroom on Monday and then you're online Tuesday. It would really just depend on how many of those virtual classes we would have set up, and then maybe where to place somebody. But certainly our intent isn't to, make somebody sweat it out in an environment that's really not benefiting them.
Thank you.
Great.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Tammy. Did you have a follow-up at all, Tammy?
Nope, that answered for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Maria, you had some additional questions?
I did. I think I have narrowed it down to 4, but I just want to say some of them are Jessica's, so it's not just me with all these questions.
Okay.
One is, I guess, maybe a bit of a clarification. So on one of the slides, it talked about daily attendance options for students with spec ed needs, for whom adapted timetables or remote learning will be a challenge, right? So I'm just trying to understand who that is and what it looks like, because our elementary students already can go back full time, and our high school students that are in congregated classes will be going back full time. So that leaves our high school students with a regular class placement. But how can they attend school daily? Because school isn't being offered daily, not all day long, I guess, anyways. So I just want to understand that comment and what that kind of refers to. And maybe I misunderstood something there, but we could get clarification on that.
Sure, Camilo, you want to answer?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Maria. When we were presenting this slide, I indicated that that type of language was first created when the province hadn't decided what the model of delivery was going to be. We were still in that wait and see mode. It was going to be one of those 3 models, and we weren't sure if our elementary schools would be going back in a traditional full-time sense. Now that we are, obviously, that, as you indicated, that expectation and that exception is somewhat a moot point, and it's irrelevant. Having said that, that expectation still holds for our students in secondary. If we have students in secondary with significant special needs that are not part of a congregated class, that in working with families, it's indicated that they're really struggling. They're not part of our life skills classes, they're not part of any of our congregated classes, but they have significant special needs. We do have the ability to support their learning in a traditional sense every day. And again, it would be on a case-by-case basis what that would look like, trying to limit obviously the cohorts that they'd be part of. But we do have that ability. The ministry has created that expectation that school boards make those exceptions for those students that working with families. We recognize that they really struggle in the adapted learning model, which is half in, half out.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, so for elementary students, with an IEP who choose distance learning and have like a regular class placement, how will the certs be organized to service those students? Like, I guess if they've got a withdrawal, like a placement, I think 2 or 3, like a resource support or withdrawal. So how will that look?
through you, Madam Chair. Maria, just to confirm, so you're asking what will it look like in with respect to the amount of the exposure, the amount of the number of students that come out of a cohort to meet with a cert? Is that what you're asking?
So this is one of Jessica's, so I'm going to try and explain it. And hope I'm understanding it correctly as well. But it's so it's elementary students. They're in a resource support or a withdrawal placement option. So 2 or 3, I think we call those. So they would meet normally. They would meet in a group maybe with the CERT regularly. But now they've chosen to be at home. They've chosen remote learning. So how will that look, or who will their CERT be? Will they still be serviced by the same CERT? And just how will those withdrawals or resource support, how will those work?
Okay, thank you. Now I understand the question. Yes, it does.
Okay.
It completely makes sense. Again, as we mentioned early on, our philosophy is that we're trying to, create as a normal school day for our students who are experiencing school virtually. And in those cases, those that through their IPRC, their placement is a resource withdrawal support or resource support through the CERT. Though we have an obligation to meet those needs and meet the requirements of the IPRC and the accommodations set out in the IEP. Who their CERT will be, again, I can't really answer that. Generally speaking, we're hoping that school CERTs will be able to support those students that are learning virtually, that are on their caseload, but that might not necessarily be the case if those numbers are so large that it's larger than what a reasonable caseload should be for a CERT. So the who, I'm not sure. The what, I can tell you that the expectation and the communication to our CERTs and our principals is that we are supporting those students in similar fashions. Again, maybe not identical, but there will be opportunities to be pulled out into small groups, possibly one-on-one, possibly. Again, the expectation recently from the ministry through their PPM on synchronous learning and asynchronous learning does indicate that students working in small groups, students working with a teacher, without a teacher, is considered synchronous type learning as well. So again, this would be something that we would be communicating with our school CERTs or department heads and our principals.
And if I can just, I think where the question came from was that some students being in school and some students being at home could sort of double the work. Like, it doesn't double the caseload, but it could, I guess, technically double the workload for the CERT if they can't meet with the same group together, right? So if they would normally meet with 4 students at the school and 2 of them are at home, I think that's kind of where the question was sort of coming from. So yeah. And
that's precisely why we've often talked tonight about, case by case. We'll look at it, we set out the expectations for our schools, that we outline, to our principals and CERTs, their obligations and the support that we are going to be providing. And then the actual logistics around it might change, from school to school, from CERT to CERT. Depending on what that looks like. We may have to make some changes and some tweaks to CERT deployment because of the number, if for whatever reason a certain school has a larger than the norm number of families and students that choose to support their students that want support in a virtual case, we may have to look at that, CERT deployment in a different way.
Okay, thank you. So I had 2 more, if that's okay, if no one else has their hand up. I don't want to make Camilla's last meeting too easy, so. Had a question about how the cohorts are going to be determined in the high schools. And we had talked last year about clustering some of our gifted students in high school if they had that, if they were looking for that sort of thing, if they were interested in that sort of thing. So I'm just wondering if that's going to continue this year. And I know at one point they were talking about cohorting by surname. I don't know if that's still the plan because the elementaries are all going back full time anyways. But how are we going to work those cohorts in high school so that, and in particular, I guess in the case of gifted students, that they still have those opportunities to collaborate with their like-minded peers, which we know is really important to those students.
Through you, Madam Chair. I know that Pat's on the line. He can maybe speak a little bit more directly to the cohorting piece. My understanding is that we still are moving towards the family cohort, unless I'm told differently. I know that I do recognize that we did talk about at SEAC last year the idea around our students that are identified gifted and trying to be intentional in secondary, in trying to congregate those students together in similar classes, again, for that ability for them to work together. That was the plan that was communicated to our guidance heads, communicated to our department heads in secondary, to work together when creating those class lists. That message will we will remind them of that message for our students that are gifted, balancing that with the need from a health and safety perspective to have those family cohorts. My understanding, it will be by family surname letters, trying to balance having 50% of their students in cohort A and cohort B. So not knowing exactly where that cutoff will be. But again, I know that Pat's still on the line, or if Stephanie has more information around the cohorts and how those will be created.
I can add if you'd like.
Yep, sure.
Okay, so I appreciate the information and the reminder around clustering the gifted students, and I'm happy to hear that that information was communicated as well last year. What I can say as far as general class lists, as far as I'm concerned at this point in time, our plan remains the same to create those class lists, cohort A and B, with approximately 15 students in each class. We plan to have families assigned to the same cohort, either A or B, so students would attend on the same days from the same family, and it would be based on alpha, and then using also student addresses to determine students in the same household with different last names, so we can keep families together. Board-wide messaging will be going out to families around the days that their student will attend. And much of this planning has to do with bus lists and coordinating the transportation. So I do respect and appreciate the piece with respect to clustering gifted students. And I think that that would be something that we would add to our list of considerations when we're looking at cohorts. If we could make it work, to be quite honest, with respect to transportation and the other requirements with family cohorting.
So thank you for that. And I guess I just I guess I'd just like to see the same kind of commitment to those students as our other exceptionalities in terms of balancing the health and physical needs with their education needs, because it is really important for those kids to be together.
I can appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. And quite often you will find if siblings will share that exceptionality. So hopefully that facilitates it a bit. And I guess so we'll go to my last question, which is kind of along the same veins, is just in terms of the differentiated learning. And I know that in any given year there's a wide range of where kids are at in a class in terms of their learning and their retention and all of that. And of course this year that's going to be even wider, given varying experiences in the spring. And I see it particularly an issue in high school where, for all of our students, where, in any given class, some students took the prerequisite in semester 1 and had the full experience, and some took it in semester 2, and even there would have had a wide range of experiences. So I see, to my mind, I understand the health and safety piece, especially when elementary might have been on an adapted model. But to my mind, it would be even for the teacher easier if students were grouped more based on kind of where they were at. So I'm just wondering, it seems to me that that's going to present a really big challenge to teachers. They're going to have a much greater range of students in the classroom. And we don't want students bored out of their minds any more than we want students struggling to keep up. So how are teachers going to handle that? And what kind of, what kind of supports are going to be there for teachers to make sure that they're able to meet that extra challenge of meeting all of their students where they are and bringing them all along so that they're all learning something every day and they're all going to, try and reach their potential. I just see it such a bigger challenge, and there's been so much focus on the health and safety piece, which I understand, but they need to get their education obviously as well, and especially in high school, we've got 4 short years to get them ready to move on to the next stage. So just wondering what considerations have been given around all of that. And that's my last question, so thank you.
Brenda, would you like me to answer?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, great, thank you. So Maria, if you recall during the presentation, one of the goals of transitioning back to school was to trying to assess the learning gaps of our students. And so that can only take place really when they're in front of our teachers, obviously either in a traditional sense or in a virtual sense. So I know that you asked the question, would it make more sense if the cohorting could be created less about by alpha and more about ability and I guess learning abilities. I don't know if logistically that we could do that between now and the first week of September. We absolutely have an obligation that we know that our students are going to come to us in September with learning gaps. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we know that not all students were successful as they normally would have been in a traditional school setting. Some of our students thrived in the virtual sense. Some struggled. Some were somewhere in between in those two extremes. And so a big part of September for our teachers is to try to assess those learning gaps of our students, both elementary and secondary, and to try and support those gaps and whether it be through remedial type work, whether it be through special education supports to support those gaps. So I can tell you that we do recognize, as you mentioned and as you indicated, that there's going to be some gaps, but I don't think we could ever realistically create cohorts based on those learning gaps and trying to create cohorts where there was a similarity in the student expectations, I guess, for lack of a better word. I hope I'm making myself clear. I'm not sure if I am.
There was quite a bit of nodding, and I did hear you talk about the gaps and all of that, and I know that these are things that you guys obviously recognize. I mean, but I just want to make sure that it's, again, I'm hearing a lot about the health and safety piece, and I'm not trying to discount that in any way, but I just kind of want to bring these issues to the forefront as well, because I think they're important, and just leave it with you, I guess.
Thank you.
Pat, I'm sorry, did I miss you? Did you have your hand up?
No, I just put it up.
Okay.
Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah.
They are important. They are important issues to bring forward, Ms. Lorenko. I think hopefully, and I'm speaking more at secondary because I think that's where your question lay. Although teachers will have the same number of students in any given class, they will have smaller classes every second day, and for longer periods of time with one particular group of students. So hopefully that'll give teachers the opportunity to build some strong relationships in a different way with their students, to get to know their learning needs a little bit better. And in some cases, with that longer period of time, it can kind of go both ways. I recognize that. but with a longer period, they might be able to, in fact, get some deeper learning opportunities in for students. Given that and recognizing that even in a 2-credit model, things are happening pretty rapidly.
Right, I agree. Yeah, and thank you for all of that. Those are all really good points. And you're right, it still is moving pretty fast in the 2-credit. And I am a little bit more focused on the high school, and full disclosure, that's where my child is, and maybe that's why, but also because I think in elementary, everybody kind of ended at the same point, right? And obviously, but obviously they had different experiences once they left, for sure, but they all kind of left physical school at the same point, and there's a lot more time to sort of catch up on those gaps. High school is really, 4 years goes by fast, and again, everybody was in a different course in second semesters. So I see it as more of a challenge to fill in all those gaps before they move on beyond grade 12. So that's kind of where my focus has been for those reasons. So appreciate all the comments. And again, I'm going to leave it with the professionals to figure it out. Thank you.
Great. And thank you so much. I mean, thank you to everybody. I know that we're probably all in meeting fatigue. And I know that a lot of, everybody's got a lot of stuff going on if you prepare for back to school. So I'm super appreciative for all the SEAC members that took the time to attend tonight's information session, put some thought behind the questions, shared with your associations that this was happening, and obviously to all of the staff, again, for your time. I understand, we've asked for you to take time out from your families, again, for another evening. So it's very much appreciated. There's so many questions around spec ed. We know that these are our most vulnerable students, and it's good to have these conversations, I think, so that we can just make sure that we're addressing any of the gaps as we move forward. So thank you very much for everyone taking the time. If there's no further questions, and I don't want to rush this, but if there's no further questions, I'm going to go ahead, just being conscious of the time. And, oh shoot, am I missing somebody in the chat? Oh, no, Andrew, okay. And I will go ahead with our closing prayer. Sorry, I just have to find it here. Andrew was kind enough to send it to me so that I would have it all here in front of me, and here we go. Okay. So if I can get you to join me in a sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blessed are you, O God of all creation. Each day you spread before us the rich and wonderful diversity of the human family created in the divine splendor of your love. Fashioned in your image, you call us to love one another with the same tender care with which you brought us to creation. Each one of us is but one small part of the glory that is you. As we serve the students and families of the Halton Catholic District School Board on the Special Education Advisory Committee, fill us with your grace, guide us with your wisdom, and give us the strength and courage to do your work, so that it may always be said of our every act, God saw that it was good. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, everybody, stay safe. Thanks again. And I guess see you in a couple of weeks when we head back to school.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Pat, for joining us.
Thank you.